So how safe is Colombia really? Hi all, I'm Isrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. Now today I'm talking about probably one of the most widely discussed topics around Colombia, and that is safety. Now there's really no shortage of info on this, but I thought I'd throw my own hat into the ring and speak about it from my own personal experience, and who knows, maybe I'll have a unique angle on something. First of all, I thought it'd be good to give a bit of background towards the causes of crime and conflict in Colombia to begin with. So I think there can be a bit of a misconception that most of the crime there is a byproduct of the poverty and inequality, but whilst you might find some correlation here, I wouldn't quite say it's the direct cause. I read a bit about some research that was done on this. Actually, as a former director of development and research at the World Bank, Paul Collier studied this quite a bit, and I believe he said that the real motivating factors are a number of other things, including products that are easily taxable by criminals, a notable percentage of youth that are relatively uneducated and therefore more susceptible to getting involved in organised crime, and of course a history of civil war and conflict. Now, whilst this research was more regarding the cause for insurgent groups, I think a lot of it can apply to other organised crime as well. You'd be surprised to know what you might deem as petty crime, like stealing phones, often connects back to an organised black market, for instance. In other words, Colombia does have an underbelly of organised crime, even if the crime appears at face value to you to be less professional or more petty. I say all of this just so you're not caught off guard, as it's important not to underestimate thieves and criminals, despite how disorganized and spontaneous they may seem to you. I don't want to scare you though, so please know that you can still very easily avoid crime in Colombia. And with that in mind, let's move on to some useful signs that can help guide you in staying safe. So the first thing I want to say is that without a doubt, the biggest determining factor of whether or not you're in any danger in Colombia is location. Where exactly are you hanging around? Are you in a corporate shopping district? Are you at a tourist site? What city or town are you in? Are you in a residential neighborhood? What kind of neighborhood is it? Are you indoors or outdoors? Are you even out in public at all, or are you just at home? Depending on how you answer any of these questions, the level of risk you're at can vary dramatically. I would say that probably the biggest telltale sign of whether or not an area is dangerous is the level of expense around you. If you look at the buildings, are they by Colombian standards super run down, or are they relatively well maintained? If you look at the pavement, is it reasonably clean and well paved, or is it a complete mess? If there are shops occupying buildings, what kind of shops are they? Are they expensive boutique stores and big chains, or are they drugstores and small local businesses? As you can probably guess, the more expensive an area is, generally the safer it is. I also want to make it clear though that the standards for measuring this should all be relative to Colombia. Even if things aren't very well maintained by your own country's standards, you have to take into account that Colombia isn't a first world country, and therefore the medium standard for this kind of thing is going to be lower on average. So even if things look a bit run down compared to what you're used to, it could totally still be an upper middle class area, for instance, and therefore reasonably safe. It's important to note, however, that this, or really anything on this list in isolation, isn't necessarily a foolproof way to know if you're in a safe area or not. It's really a combination of everything I'm about to mention. So with that in mind, another revealing sign of the level of safety in any given area are the people around you. And I don't even just mean the type of people, but also the amount of people. I would say on average, the more people there are, generally the safer an area is. This isn't to say that you're totally immune to crime in busy areas though. I've heard of incidents where thieves are very crafty and can just snatch your phone out of your hand and make a run for it, even when there are a lot of people around. But I wouldn't say this is super common. What I would say though is that having a lot of people around you makes it harder for thieves to pull anything overt on you. As in a large crowd, they never know who's watching. You know, there might be police nearby, and so if they're going to pull something, they have to be quick and subtle about it. Because of this, you'll rarely find any muggings or anything beyond pickpocketing in busy areas, and even that isn't super common. I should say though that all of this goes out the window if you happen to be in an unsafe area to begin with. Like if you're hanging around a crime-ridden neighborhood, thieves might be more brazen with their crimes, not care as much about how many people can see them. So just make sure first that you're not in one of these areas, which you can generally determine by going off my previous point about the buildings and infrastructure. Getting back to people though, I should say that it is important as well to be observant of the type of people around you. I personally was mugged once in Bogota because I wasn't observant of the type of people who are hanging around in that area. It was nighttime and I was walking down a path next to a highway where there were a lot of people, but they were all either homeless or thieves waiting to spring on someone. So that should have been a red flag to me, but I took the risk and paid for it. So yeah, when it comes to people, you want to first check how busy it is, and for the people who are around you, what kind of people are they? If you ask yourself these two questions whenever you're out, along with the question of how expensive your surroundings are, you can generally determine the level of safety of any given area. Even if the answer to one of these questions is looking good, it's still important to ask all three so you know the level of risk you're taking. My next bit of advice is something you've probably already heard before if you watched a bunch of videos about Colombia, and that is no des papaya. This is an idiom that basically means don't give anyone a reason to rob you, so in other words, don't flaunt expensive items when out in public. So I'd say this is definitely advice worth following. You should be discreet with your valuables, and whilst you don't have to hide them completely, you can still pull out your phone for brief periods when you need to, you wouldn't want to walk around with them continuously for the world to see too much either. When it comes to jewelry or expensive wearables, I just say leave them at home unless you hang out exclusively in La Zona Rosa, but generally for anything expensive, you can still use it briefly when you're in a safe area, but just not for extended periods of time. I will say though that I think the popularity of no des papaya could pull a lot of people into a false sense of security, as it's really just still a precaution and not a 100% foolproof solution. I'd say that it's definitely useful in safer areas, but if you find yourself in an area where thieves are ready to spring on you, they're likely going to do this regardless of whether or not you show them anything. When I got mugged, I wasn't holding my phone or anything expensive. The thief probably just saw my blonde hair and overall appearance and robbed me as soon as they realized I was a foreigner. So yeah, before you even think of too much about the no des papaya, just remember that the location and the people around you are much higher determining factors as to the level of safety. Alright, on to the last fact that I wanted to mention, time of day. This is a pretty straightforward one and fairly obvious, but the difference in safety between night and day in Colombia is night and day, I'm so sorry. I go as far as making a bold statement though and say that it's almost certain that you won't get mugged during the day if you're not in a dangerous area. At night though, it really is a wild card. So when the sun goes down, try and use Ubers or taxis to get around instead of walking if you can. And if you can't, just be extra diligent in following the other advice I've given. For what it's worth, when I got mugged, it was nighttime and I never had any troubles during the day. So yeah, just be aware that the chances of danger go up quite a bit when the sun goes down. So those were all the determining factors I'd give for danger in Colombia. I just wanted to make a few important disclaimers before I finish this one up though. First of all, in Colombia, it's quite common for beggars to come up to you on the street and ask for money. This might be something that alarms you to begin with, but just know that most people who do this have no intention of robbing you. Beggars in Colombia just tend to be more overt about how they go about this than what you might be used to at home, and often a lot more persistent as well. If you say no once, don't be surprised if they keep asking and follow you for a bit until you've really made it clear. Now, whilst these people don't usually want to rob you, it's also important that you don't get too relaxed about this. I can say from my experience, I kind of got used to it after a while, and then when I actually got mugged, it really caught me off guard as the thief approached me in a similar way to a beggar. So yeah, whilst you don't have to panic about beggars, you should always be on guard and paying attention to whether or not the person is being vicious with you, as this can be a telltale sign as to whether or not they want to rob you. If you do happen to get mugged, the best thing you can do during the moment is just surrender to it, as you don't know if the thief is armed or not and how they might retaliate, and it's always better to preserve your own personal safety over your belongings. Even means of defense like pepper spray, I personally wouldn't use, as they could still retaliate if it were as simple as pulling a trigger, but I'll leave that decision to you. If you just surrender to it though, it's highly unlikely you'll be physically harmed, as the thief's only real incentive usually is just to nick your stuff. So again, my recommendation is just to let it happen. Of course, if they do start getting violent without you provoking them, that's a different story, and self-defense means might become necessary then, but this is highly unlikely to happen. In terms of what you should do after the incident though, I'm going to go into depth on that in my next video, so I won't discuss that now. On a more positive note, I also wanted to say that Colombia, whilst by no means the safest country in the world, is still nowhere near as dangerous as what you may have seen in the media. I'll say that Narcos in particular, whilst a great show, really isn't indicative of the current state of Colombia in terms of safety. You know, Pablo Escobar is long gone, and the sort of large-scale crimes you see in that show are significantly less common and far more restricted to unsafe areas you'll probably never visit. Colombia isn't currently a war-ridden country, and whilst it has a history of political unrest, it really has been a while since it's been a truly dangerous country for tourists. Finally, one thing I wanted to close on is that if you're scouring YouTube for advice on safety in Colombia, I should say that a lot of what I've talked about is stuff that will likely become quite intuitive to you when you're in Colombia. I found that it's generally pretty easy to get a vibe of the area you're in, where to avoid, and when you can use your phone and other valuables. Really the biggest not intuitive thing I would say is that it's easy to get very comfortable in Colombia after a while and feel that nothing could ever happen to you, and this can cause you to take risks that you really shouldn't. When I got mugged, it was because I walked down a very dark, shady street at night, and I knew it looked dodgy, but I did it anyway because I developed a sort of invincibility complex. So with that in mind, try to still always err on the side of caution, even if you've been safe so far, and you hopefully won't run into any issues. Anyway, I'm going to stop this one here. Thanks for watching all this way. In my next video, I'm going to talk about things you can actively do to reduce your chances of being robbed. So stick around for that, and for more videos about life in Colombia, like, subscribe, bell, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao!